what I've learnt about it is when you got a dream goal that you always wanted to do, like be an activist or a cinematographer like Jameisha's, sorry, did I get your name right? Or a singer like Charlotte, you mustn't give up as long as you keep your dream with you and follow your steps. So there's only 17 more. But there's only 17 more days till this decade finishes. But you can always follow your dream no matter what. No giving up whatsoever.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming, especially since what happened yesterday. The fact that you're even here is quite incredible, so I appreciate it. I hope everyone's had a good morning. My name is Jameisha Prescod. I am a filmmaker, video journalist, and wait, I need to change the slides. Wait, is it just spacebar?
Next.
I should have just planned that beforehand, shouldn't I? So I'm also the founder of a platform called You Look Okay to Me. So essentially I use video content and visual creativity to explore themes surrounding chronic illness and how that connects to wider societal issues and themes. So that's the short of it basically. A bit extra about me, I'm 24, I'm from Croydon in South London, which is in South London, and anyone who doesn't think it's in London is wrong. Just had to say. I love documentaries, I like watching them, I like making them. Previously I worked part-time for a small documentary company, started as a researcher, but then started editing their online content and managing their digital stuff, and now I work at BBC. I worked at a podcast before, running their digital content. I've moved to a department now called BBC Stories, where we make short video journalistic pieces, and then in January I'm moving to BBC Africa to do the same thing, but with a focus on African stories. So that's a bit about me, and the theme today is silence, as Al presented, and we wanted to talk about breaking the silence. And so I want to talk about breaking the silence surrounding chronic illness and how that can have an impact on chronic illness patients and the positivity that could bring. So before we jump into that, I'll take you back to the beginning, and then we'll go through a little journey of where it was before, what I'm doing now, and what I want to do in the future. So I'll take you back to 2012, which in a few weeks is going to be 8 years ago, and I'm going to have an existential crisis when that happens, because I can't believe that, but it is 8 years ago. Lots of cool things happened in 2012. We had the Olympics, which was really, really fun in London. We had that thing where we thought the world was going to end when the Mayan calendar told us that it was, but it didn't, and we made memes, which was great. And less exciting than those two things as I finished high school, which is maybe less relevant to you guys, but I had started a performing arts school called the Brit School, and so there I had found my love of creativity. Most people ask me if I sing, dance or act. I do none of those things. I literally studied media, but people tend to get quite disappointed with that, but it's fine. Despite the disappointment, I had a great time. I found myself. I was able to find my love of creating visuals. But at the same time, I was dealing with loads of problems. So every single day I was experiencing joint pain. I was experiencing muscle aches. It felt like I'd gone to the gym when I hadn't. I was fatigued all the time, I was tired. It doesn't matter how much I slept, I still felt really, really tired. And there was no explanation as to what was going on. Go to doctors and they would say I was completely healthy, I was fine. So I'm going through all this stuff, there was no answers, and I look okay on the outside, which explains the name of my project. But on the inside, I was dealing with a lot. So years go by and it gets to 2014 and things started to get more positive. I'd got into uni to study digital film production. I wanted to be a cinematographer at the time like everybody else in my class. I also had a part-time job at IKEA, so I can identify random bits of IKEA furniture like what you're sitting at the front. It's a cool party trick. It's called Sodder Ham. No one cares, but that's what it's called. That was cool because I had a bit of financial freedom from my parents. I could buy all the sweets that I wanted without them taking the mick out of me. But more important than that particular year is when I got my diagnosis. So I finally had the answers to what I was going through in 2012. I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called lupus. So for those who don't know, your immune system's supposed to look after you. It's supposed to fight off bacteria and colds and basically keeps you alive, but mine's a bit of a traitor and it attacks my own body instead, and that's what was causing the symptoms that I had before. So I got my diagnosis, I was happy because I could take medication and in my mind feel better. I was starting my adult life and trying to get into the film industry, so it was really exciting. Except no one actually tells you after you get diagnosed that it's actually quite hard to manage all those things while you're sick, and I did not realise until I started all those things. So my peers, film school is mad competitive. Everybody is trying to show off and stand out, and they're standing on sets for 16 hours a day assisting directors or holding heavy camera equipment, and I could barely hold my head up for 3 hours. I could barely get out of bed. So how the hell was I supposed to compete with those guys if I couldn't even do half the stuff that they could do? So there was that. I had to quit my part-time job because I couldn't manage it. So it felt like everything was slipping away. I felt like, why am I going to go back to uni to spend $9,000 a year if I can't even do half the stuff? Maybe film isn't for me, because who's going to want to hire a sick person like me, and maybe they won't believe me because I look fine on the outside. And then also I have no financial independence, so I felt a bit rubbish, I was at home feeling a bit crap about myself. But eventually I got bored of feeling crap, and so I decided to combine my love of creating visual content with what I was going through, because essentially I had no one to talk to about it. In my mind, there was no one else going through it. So if I create video content and talk about what I'm going through, maybe then I could educate people, it could also be therapeutic for me, and maybe that's my start in film. Maybe I can find a different way of doing it than everybody else. And so that's essentially where You Look Okay to Me was born. It was through that kind of concept. So it started with a website, I started writing blogs, and then I hosted other blog posts from other people, and that still goes on to this day. But mainly I'm on social media, and that's where my content is housed. So it started with small, short videos where I was just talking about various issues with chronic illness or explaining things, but then they've evolved into larger videos that speak about wider issues. The way I try to make videos is I usually start with an issue that I might have faced personally or something that I've seen, and I'll start kind of telling a story in that way. But then the theme opens up into what I'm actually talking about, a wider theme that affects a lot of people. So in this video, for example, I start talking about what it was like after diagnosis and what I wanted to do. But really the video is about grief, that most chronic illness patients go through a stage of grief because you have an idea of yourself of what you were and what you're going to be and what you used to be able to do. And when an illness comes that you didn't ask for, that you didn't expect, and it kind of takes that away, there's a grieving process because there's loss there. So my videos tend to kind of follow that kind of concept. It starts with a personal story and then it opens up into something that is wider, because that then encompasses of what I like to do with my content, and it's not showing up. I think I press next, but it's here. So I like to share stories, but in order to open up those wider themes, it means that other people can share stories with me as well. So as I started putting this content out, that's what started to happen. People started sharing their stories with me, both online and offline. Offline, I had friends I'd known for years that all of a sudden started telling me that they had chronic illnesses too. I had a friend with Crohn's disease that he almost lost his life to it. I had a friend with MS, arthritis, all of these things, and I had no idea, and nobody wanted to share it for some reason. Same with online. I'm not the first person to talk about chronic illness online. There were forums and groups, but after putting my platform out there, people started messaging me and telling me their experiences after these videos came out, and oftentimes they were very similar, and sometimes they said they had never said these things out loud to anyone. It was the first time they felt like they could open up about it because someone else was going through it. So essentially there was this idea of a collective silence surrounding chronic illness. Maybe it was because it was guilt, maybe it's embarrassment, maybe it's feeling like you're just not good enough. But I think sharing stories is powerful, because what that means is someone else can connect with that, and it means they might share their story too. And I think sharing stories is one of the most powerful ways to create change. Human stories create empathy, and so when that happens, I think people become a bit more understanding, and then we can see the change that we want to see. But yeah, so here's some examples of some people I've connected with. They're more on public profiles, which is why I'm sharing them with you. We have triple cripples at the top, so I connect with them a lot. We started messaging on Instagram after sharing content. They focus on the fact that they are black women with disabilities and the 3 levels of discrimination that gets faced there and how those intersect. As a black woman with disability, we have conversations about that, and it's just great. It's almost therapeutic in a way to talk to people that just get it. We have Claudia, which is on the right at the top. We're both a similar age dealing with chronic illnesses. She has ME. And we speak about the concept of, there was a period of time where I couldn't work, so the embarrassment of having to get benefits and wanting to hide that because you didn't want to be on the front of a certain newspaper that likes to expose benefit frauds. So there was that. My friend Taylor, she's living with a chronic illness that's not covered on the NHS, so having to actually fundraise for her medication and medical equipment. I would never have known that was happening to people had we not been sharing stories together online. And the last person I don't actually connect with as much, but I think he's really important to put on here. I'm mainly on social media, and it gets a bad reputation, and rightly so for some reasons, because it can make people feel like crap. But at the same time, I think it's been a really powerful tool for people like me and people like these guys to share our stories with a wider audience. So Jameson was in a documentary that quite badly misrepresented him as a chronic illness patient. It made it seem like he was making up his illness for attention. He's got ME, quite severe, and it's so severe he can't speak. It's too painful. He can't have harsh lights. But he is one of the most powerful voices in the chronic illness community in sharing his story and creating change for other patients with ME. So it just shows the power of social media and that it can be used as a force for good. And I think in this particular case, for those with long-term conditions, it has really been an amazing tool. Some people can't leave their house, some people can't leave the hospital. And so how else can you connect with people that are like you, which is on here. And so I have two main goals for You Look Okay to Me, and that is community and education. So I want to create a sense of community for people with chronic illnesses and feel comfortable enough to share their own stories. What I found is that after setting up the platform, the more people started sharing stories, the more we started seeing patterns. Something that you might have thought just affected you is actually affecting quite a lot of people. So for example, there are many of us that have been fired because of our chronic illness and been jobless because the boss didn't understand or maybe thought we were making it up. There are some people that had to drop out of school. There are some people that had chronic illnesses in early life and social services got called on their parents because they thought their parents were making up their chronic illness. And many of us have been misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed and taken 7 years to actually figure out what was going on with us. These type of things at first you think are happening just to you. When you realise it's multiple people going through the same thing, just for the sheer fact that we started speaking out, it means that now you can potentially create that change that you want to see because it's like a large issue at hand rather than something that's just happening to one individual. So there's that, but there's also education. So having a community is nice. Talking amongst ourselves is really nice and safe and warm. But education is important for people that don't have chronic illnesses or maybe don't understand as much, because that's how that change happens as well. So reaching out to other people. It might mean that boss that might have fired someone has now become a bit more understanding of his employee that has a long-term condition. Maybe a doctor that might not have been as believing of a patient might hear a story and realise actually maybe I should listen to this person. It's hoping that creating that education can make that change as well. There's actually like there's another goal that I had, which is also collaboration. Collaboration is another way, I think, to reach larger audiences by sharing stories around chronic illness and breaking that silence. So there's some examples of collaboration I've done. I mean, originally when I was setting up this platform, especially on social media, I didn't think people would be interested because it's not sexy. Like, it's not like an Instagram model or makeup or a travel blogger with like drone shots and stuff. It's not sexy like that. And when you hear illness, originally people don't go, ooh, yeah, it's not something that most people at first think about, but actually I've been surprised that there have been collaboration and people have been interested in connecting. So this is a documentary that I appeared in along with other people with chronic illnesses. That's me with my friend. My friend's there at the front. I'm going to bait him out. And there were other people in this documentary as well. So this guy at the bottom has cystic fibrosis, but he's also a fitness blogger. And then someone else was an online sex worker and she has a chronic illness. And it was a great documentary that explores how people with long-term conditions use the internet to connect. So that's on a BFI player, by the way, if you want to watch it. And then other collaborations I've done. I've worked with Creative Conscience. They are a great organisation that encourage young people to use their art to spark social change. Facebook, I've been on a programme with them. I've done some stuff with the BBC and Scope as well. Like, Scope is a great charity that my friend at the front works for as well, that amplify the voices of disabled people to share their stories. And so this collaboration was great because it kind of shows that there are people out there actually that want to listen and want to engage with this type of stuff. But yeah, so that is kind of where You Look Okay to Me is at now, but I also want to talk about where I want to take it in the future, because I feel like the work is never really done when it comes to trying to change the lives of people with long-term conditions. So I've spent a lot of time talking about my story and sharing my story, and I want to spend more time allowing other people to share their stories. So I currently work for BBC, as I said before, and I've picked up some skills with journalism, and I want to apply those to what I do with You Look Okay to Me. So there are more stories and there's more silence surrounding other aspects of life with a chronic illness that we're not talking about, and I think using a journalistic edge with video content could really open up that conversation. So stuff like medical injustice. How many medical injustice type stories are happening at the moment that need to be uncovered, and especially with what's going on at the moment with the cuts, you know, like there's more things that we need to talk about. How about how one's identity, maybe your cultural identity or gender, has an impact on the way that you talk about your illness. I know in my particular experience, I'm from an Afro-Caribbean background, and a lot of the time we don't talk about illness as openly as we should. I ended up finding out years later that I had 2 family members that died of the same illness that I had, and no one told me, even though everybody knew. I had an uncle I'm really close with, and I didn't see him for a couple of years when I was a child, and it turns out it's because he had cancer and no one said anything, and so that kind of needs to change. So what about stories like that? And international stories. Why is it that someone with lupus in a different country might die because they can't afford their medication, but I can stand in front of you and be talking to you right now? So I think it's important to break the silence on those things as well, these larger issues, and that's where I want to sort of take it in the future. And I don't know how fast I've been, because I know I'm a bit of a motor mouth, so I'm not sure if it's been 20 minutes or not, but this is my last slide. I got this from Instagram, clearly, so I can't claim it, but I want to leave you with one last thing, which is sharing your story is activism. There's a way that we view activism. I think there's iconography with that. There's marching in the street, there's protesting, which is all great, and I think that's cool, but I also think there's other ways to practice activism, and I think sharing stories and experiences is one of them, and doing that, because sharing stories is a brave act. Oh, I don't think he likes it. I don't think he agrees. Sharing story is a really brave act. You're making yourself vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there and leaving yourself open. But doing so could mean, even if it's with one person, can mean that you've changed something, that you've changed someone's idea. You've allowed them to have more empathy in the future. So, and you can do that in any way that you want to. Me personally, the best way I do that is videos. But if it's painting, if it's poetry, if it's gardening would be cool. Like, do it in the way that you know how. Do it in the language that you know how. Because your voice is powerful, and it is an important tool that could really create significant and real change. But that's it. So thank you for coming. And yeah.